Welcome back to BetterHelp's In Session series. My name is Hesu Jo, and I'm a licensed therapist and part of the clinical operations team here at BetterHelp. Today, we are super excited to be delving into the topic of relationships and to be joined by Jillian Turecki, a certified relationship coach, teacher, and writer. For 20 years, Jillian has taught others how to transform their relationships with themselves. Fueled by an insatiable curiosity about what makes a relationship thrive, Jillian has helped thousands through their teaching and writing revolutionize their relationship with themselves so that they transform their relationships with others. That just speaks to me because I say all the time that the relationship you have with yourself is one of the most important ones, if not the most important one. So Jillian is sought out for her compassionate, direct, and very authentic style of coaching and teaching. Thank you so much, Jillian, for making time to be with us here today. I wanted to start this conversation off by learning a bit more about you, how you started this 20-year journey, and what led you to where we are.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So I discovered yoga, God, how many years? About 25 years ago. And I discovered the physical practice of yoga. And it changed my life. From really the first class that I ever took, I became completely obsessed and knew that this was the direction that I wanted to take my life in. I mean, at first it was just like, oh, this feels really good. I feel really good. And then as the years progressed, it was more about understanding the relationship between our minds and our nervous system, and how that actually combined creates your state of consciousness. And your state of consciousness, within your state of consciousness, a large part of it is your emotional state. And so I just became obsessed with what is commonly referred to as the mind-body connection. And I knew pretty much right away that I wanted to teach this. It felt like a calling. And so I did. About 2 years into practice, I started teaching it. And it was a really wonderful time in my life. And I would say about 7 years into teaching, I was starting to feel like I wanted to do something more. It wasn't that I never had this thought where I wanted to stop teaching, but I did have this thought of like, well, where is this actually going to take me? Like what, and how am I going to continue to help people? And is it just going to be by telling them what to do with their bodies? And I was just it was just an open-ended thing because I also very much wanted to get married and have a child or maybe have two children. So what started as me feeling like I was living my quote unquote purpose, if you will, then it kind of it progressed into, what is my purpose? Like where do I want to take this? And so anyway, around that time, I got married, and it was I always say that our relationship before we got married was 90% on point and 10% problematic. But there was two things that happened. That 10% was really big, even though it was the problems that occurred maybe were only like 3 instances. Those instances were incredibly significant, so that when we got married, the 10% became the 90%. And the 90% became the 10%. And even though I felt I had all these tools from being a yogi, quote unquote, for so many years and having this sort of like conscious awareness, I really was actually quite immature, for lack of a better word. I mean, there's a spectrum for that for sure, but just not didn't really have the wisdom necessary to understand my own patterns when it came to relationship and how to get out of it. So the marriage was incredibly difficult, and it ended really terribly and abruptly. And my mom was dying of lung cancer at the same time, and I was having a miscarriage at the same time. So there was like a culmination of events that led to me entering the dark night of the soul. And I became obsessed with what makes a relationship work and last. And I was obsessed with my own story of not like, why am I going through this again? I was so beaten down by the heartbreak that I just wanted to figure out a way not just to only heal, but to also, well, really, I wanted to figure out a way to heal. But in that journey of figuring out a way to heal, I realized that healing is not just the time, the passage of time, but it's willing to work on yourself so that you transform yourself, basically. And so it was during that time that I was really trying to heal, that I had a teacher, I had mentors, and then I said, this is the path that I must go in. And I can integrate everything that I've ever learned from the mind-body connection and teaching people how to regulate their emotions through their bodies. I can integrate all of that into this, but this is the new path. And here I am today, almost 10 years later.
So really it was this journey of figuring yourself out, because that seems to be something that a lot of people miss or neglect or choose to think like, well, I'm trying to figure out how to function in healthy ways in a relationship with other people. And somehow we're thinking like always like externally, it's something on the outside. But what I'm hearing through your own personal journey and now something you are teaching to so many people is like, we can't start doing that much stuff meaningfully on the outside if our insides are messed up, if our insides are not resolved, and the insides, the way we feel about our insides is a good thing. Because if it's not a good thing, then how can we really like bring that out of us and keep exuding goodness to others?
Yeah, it begins with us. Every relationship that we have ever been in has been a mirror, and it reflects back to us where our work is. And that's just the bottom line. Like you can, and it's like people who, let's say there are people who need to work on their marriage or they need to work on their relationship. Any work that you do on the relationship is incomplete, or it is always going to include, if you're with a good therapist or coach, and let's say you're a couple and you go to see a couples counselor or coach, the way that you know that you're with someone who is at least professional enough to help you, they are going to force you to confront yourself. And if you're not confronting yourself, then you're not, in my opinion, with the right therapist, the right practitioner, because it's always about, at the end of the day, yes, we have to learn skills of better relating for sure, but our relationship to ourselves, just to echo your point, will always be there to look at.
I really loved what you said about relationships, kind of holding a mirror up to us and then relating this to therapy, because this is what therapists are aiming to do too, right? Is hold this mirror up to make you look at it, which a lot of clients, they can have as many mirrors held up to them as they want, but they can still walk away from that if they feel they're not in the right place.
Yes.
So this idea of like good professional therapist may even force you, maybe strongly encourage or strongly accompany you to look at this mirror. So folks, if you've never been in therapy or you gave up on therapy because it was too uncomfortable, that discomfort is a sign that you were about to get into something that's really important. Sometimes, yes, confronting yourself and transforming this relationship with self is painful because you're uncovering some things about yourself that may not be positive, that may not feel good, that make you feel like you have to question a lot of things that you thought you knew about yourself. But it sounds like that's a very important piece of this work.
It is very important piece.
And so like needing to look at yourself sounds like a good reason to go to therapy. Can you share, like, in the context of relationship, what are you thinking leads folks in a relationship to get to that point of like, I think we should talk to somebody. I think we should talk to somebody.
Well, unfortunately, I think that a lot of people wait until things are really bad. And then they go to therapy. And I would love to see more couples work preemptively and get themselves into couples counseling before things get hard, so that because there's always ways in which you can deepen intimacy. There's always ways in which you can improve your relationship. So yeah, people usually get into that when they start to feel powerless and hopeless. And usually what happens is a couple will go into couples therapy or counseling of some sort. And pretty much always one person is thinking, let's fix the other. It's all about let's fix the other person so that we're going to be okay. And what people discover, or what they should discover in couples therapy, is that you're both the problem. You know, my ex-husband and I went to couples therapy, and she ended up being my personal therapist to help me recover from our divorce. And she was an amazing therapist to me, but it was not good couples therapy. And the reason why it wasn't good couples therapy is because there was no accountability. There was no one being truly accountable. We weren't being forced to be accountable. And I think that if you want to change your life, if you want to change your relationship, you have to first start with the acknowledgement that it begins with you, that maybe you are part of the problem. And that is something that people don't want to look at, but it's actually very empowering, because if you can see yourself as part of the problem, then that's when you can become part of the solution. But as long as you think the other person has to change and transform in order for you to be okay, you immediately forfeit all your power. And that's not, that might feel really good to the ego initially, but that's not what you want ultimately.
That just kind of jogged my memory of something I've heard you say. We don't want to be in a relationship with somebody that's constantly triggering our suffering. And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like when I heard that, it's like a small snip of something. I didn't immediately go to, if this person's constantly triggering my suffering, the relationship is over. My mind went to, if this person is doing or saying something that's constantly triggering this thing in me, something has to change. Maybe it's that they're not the person for me, or maybe it's something about like figuring out what my triggers are, doing something about that, and then also working with this other person so that they can figure that out for themselves. How does that integrate between the both of us?
That's a really good point, because I think that it's very, if you're constantly being stimulated in the relationship, and you're in a way that you're suffering, if it's constantly stimulating your suffering rather than inspiring you to grow, it's like, where's that line? I think that if you're constantly triggered in your relationship, as you said, something is wrong. And then you have to kind of pull apart the curtain to see, okay, well, what is wrong? Maybe I am with someone who's just absolutely terrible, who's just terrible and terrible for me. Or maybe we're terrible for each other. This is a mismatch. Or maybe I'm a walking trigger, and it doesn't matter who I'd be in a relationship with. This stuff would just keep coming up because it's something that I need to work on. One wouldn't know until they actually investigated it. But if you are constantly triggered in a relationship, you just have to see that something's not right.
I could see somebody living out there in their life and just constantly being triggered by everything normally, even and not in a relationship. So I could see that turning into a reason for someone to avoid relationships altogether. What are some other common things that you've observed that people might have around romantic relationships? Things that people walk around with fears, whether they're in them or not.
I mean, fear, look, it's either love or fear, honestly. I mean, fear is the thing. I mean, so the most common fears that I've seen, the number one being is the fear of being hurt. If someone has had enough relationship pain, then they become guarded and they become shielded. And so people will prevent themselves from getting into relationships again, or they'll get into relationships and they'll be totally closed because no one wants to be abandoned. No one wants to be hurt. So it's really the fear of being hurt that's predominant. It reminds me of something. I've been watching this show on Netflix. It's a reality show called Love on the Spectrum. I don't know if you've heard of it, but you've seen it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you've had this thought, but so it's dating for people who are on the autism spectrum. I find it inspiring. I find it interesting. I find it heartbreaking. I find it uplifting. There's just like all these emotions. But one thing that really struck me is, so all these people who are on the spectrum, pretty much all of them, except for the ones that they interviewed that who are in a relationship, they've never been in a relationship. Most of them have never even romantically kissed someone, right? They're all full grown adults, never had sex, never loved anyone. And what they want is they want a relationship and to fall in love so badly. And the only fear that they have is the fear of being alone. And that's another fear. People are afraid of being hurt and they're afraid of being alone and dying alone. But they don't have the fear of being hurt because they don't have a history of relationships to look back on. And so what's so inspiring about that is that their hearts are wide open. And you so rarely see someone who's like, I just want to fall in love and I just want to be in a relationship. Yes, you see that, but so many times that's convoluted with the fear of being hurt. And these people don't have that past to reflect on. And it's so interesting. And to me, it just highlights even more how fearful people are of being hurt because they've been hurt in the past, because they haven't had that experience. Looking at love through their eyes, you're reminded of how pure of an experience it is. And it's become it's not that love is not pure. It's just that all our fears and beliefs and issues around love has sort of tainted our perception of it. And we see it as sort of like this thing that's scary, or it's abusive, or it's going to lead to our control. Like we have all these associations to relationship and being in love that are so negative that people are walking around with. And yet really, to share a life with someone should be a gift, not a burden.
The imagery I'm getting while you're speaking of this is like this stuff that so many people carry around with them when they're exploring love or exploring dating. I'm thinking like colloquially of baggage. People have a lot of baggage, and while you're describing these folks that are kind of like moving through this experience without the baggage, we get to see this contrast of how they might experience it. Yeah. And like in therapy, folks, you don't learn how to like remove baggage and it's never there anymore. It's about learning how to live in your life carrying your baggage and not having the baggage be burdensome, but really it's part of you and it's something that you're carrying around. Like, how can we turn that into something that's like something we can learn from, something that we can accept rather than feel like it's a burden?
Yes.
And in this world of dating, like you said, there's like all these new ideas that come up or old ideas that are associated with the baggage. I often hear of people saying that they're fearful of appearing to be too needy or clingy. And so then this makes people alter their behavior or even their communication. They're not outright and honest about what it is because of what you're saying. This fear of being hurt, which is like very connected to the fear of being rejected. So what do you see happening in your work as a relationship coach in this world of like people not wanting to be seen as being too needy and like being told like you gotta tone that down or else you're gonna scare them away or something like that?
Right. This is such an interesting topic. And yes, I would say that, everyone is trying to avert rejection, right? And so if you're someone who's been in a relationship and you've been given the feedback before that you're too needy, then that person might be the same person who goes on dates and tries to act like they're all cool and go with the flow. Yeah, whatever, just order me whatever. Like, I like everything on the menu when really they just really don't like everything on the menu, right? So they're almost like this is how people show up on dates and they're not authentic. The whole needy conversation is such an interesting one because there's something that's circulating right now in the psychology, zeitgeist, social media world, which is like people are saying there's no such thing as neediness. And that's just not true. And it is a fine line. Yes, are there people who have been told that they're needy and they're absolutely not? They were just literally in a relationship with someone who is selfish, who feels threatened by anyone else's needs because they feel like they have to please everyone. So someone's needs becomes a threat to them because they're like, I have to make sure that I'm perfect and meet all their needs. I mean, everyone has their baggage, so to speak. I've experienced both sides. I've experienced in the past being in a relationship where I've been so afraid to have needs and to appear needy that I have muted myself, where I was not assertive, where I didn't stand firm for something that I wanted because I did not want to be perceived that way. So I have definitely been that person. And I've also been the person who struggled to meet her own emotional needs and over relied on a man to fulfill my sense of purpose and happiness. And when we depend on another person to make us happy, we actually do become needy. And that neediness, it doesn't have to be so existential. It could be like, let's say you're hosting a dinner party and you really want them to go pick up wine for the dinner party, even though you're perfectly capable of picking up the wine. And then they say that they're busy. And then all of a sudden you're like dialing them up like over and over, like, please pick up the wine, please pick up the wine. I'm using a very simple metaphor, but that could actually be seen as needy. Like you can just go across the street and pick up the wine yourself, but you're needing someone else to do that for you. That might not be the best example, but what I'm saying is it shows up in small ways. It's like, if we don't feel, let's say, financially stable on our own, and we over rely on someone else for our financial stability, that's very common in certain generations. We're entering a generation where that's not as common, right? If we feel like if we're bored, let's just say we're someone who easily gets bored. And so we're looking to our friends, our partners, we're looking to everyone to be like, please entertain me. I'm so bored. That's needy. You need to figure out how not to be bored without making it everyone else's responsibility to entertain you. Like you need to figure that out. If you're feeling lonely or you're not feeling love and you're like, please love me. I don't know how to, I don't know how to reach out to my friends and find love in my community and friendships. I don't know, I'm not willing to take that walk in nature and find that oneness with the world. Like, I'm not willing to do all these things. I want you to love me and make it all better. And that's part of the codependent mindset. And that is needy. And so this idea that there's no such thing as neediness is absolutely ridiculous. And quite frankly, I believe not helpful and emotionally dangerous. But where do you draw the line? So there's that. And then there's also the person who does not assert herself. And I say herself because it's usually a woman, but it's not always, in a relationship. And she has to learn that her needs matter and that she deserves to have certain needs met inside of a relationship. So these large sweeping statements, there's no such thing as neediness, doesn't make sense because it's all really dependent on who you're working with.
Thank you. And I know that there's a version of me somewhere in the past that listening to all this would probably have been quite triggered. Like a lot of the things that you're saying, it's like, that's not me, but it is me. But, now I've done quite a lot of work on myself too. So if I'm getting personal about it, I'm able to engage in this kind of conversation and not feel like it's an attack on me.
Yes.
Because I have delved deep into, the things that used to trigger me, like thinking about why that is. What does that say about how I really feel about myself? What are the things I can do to, start changing in a positive way the ways I feel about myself, so I'm not constantly needing others to validate me, others to reassure me, others to X, Y, and Z. And these are things that we're all going to experience at some point in our relationship. So it's not to say that like you are never allowed to need somebody to do something for you.
Oh, you have to depend. Look, it's interdependence. It's not independence and dependence. It's interdependence. If you can't rely and lean on your partner, then I don't know why they're your partner. What is the point of a relationship if you can't rely on it? But yes, it's, and the person who's incredibly insecure and needs a lot of reassurance. And I work with a lot of those women, and I work well with them because I was that woman at one point. I was that girl. And so, yes, we want to understand why that is. We want to have a sensitivity towards it. Certain needs were not met as a child. All that is true. What is also true is that the neediness and the needing constant reassurance is a neediness in the relationship that will sabotage the relationship. The person who was once very attracted to her will no longer be attracted to her or him if you constantly need reassurance. So my job is to help this person have healthy relationships. And so they need to understand that the constant reassurance is not needing reassurance normal, always needing reassurance because you're very insecure. That is making it so that you are unable to have a healthy relationship that lasts. Now let's look into why that's there. Mm-hmm. So it's not a but, it's an and.
I hear you using terms that we talk about in therapy all the time, especially codependence, interdependence. And now some of the things that you've described are very similar to something that therapists like to call anxiety. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how does anxiety manifest and show up in relationships in the ways that you see in your work? What does anxiety have to do with our needs being met or not met?
Anxiety is the real epidemic. I think that, we live in a culture where, and there's so many things it could be. Part of it is our diet. Part of it is our lifestyle. Part of it is social media. I don't understand, if you are someone living in Western culture and you don't struggle with anxiety, then I just really want to study you and put you in a petri dish. So we have to understand that part of the reason why anxiety has reached epidemic proportions has a lot to do with environment. When it comes to relationship, so people put these days so much stock in a romantic relationship. There's this fantasy that the romantic relationship is going to be the thing that saves us, right? And whereas we used to be much more surrounded by community and help, a lot of people we live much more solo lives, and many of us, it's just not the same anymore. And so we put a lot of stock in a romantic relationship. And then we don't want to feel, and then you add to that just a terrible fear of rejection. And then what you've got is someone who's anxious. And then there's more layers to that. So there's some people who are anxious who will get very obsessive and cling. There's some who will completely shut down. In my experience, what I have seen is that people really do a combination of both. Some people will be more leaning towards what would be referred to as anxious attachment versus someone who's avoidant. But there's, relationship anxiety is just it's this constant fear of something not working out and being rejected. But I always like to say that context matters. So that person who's anxious, let's just say they get an amazing promotion at work, the promotion that they've always wanted, some really amazing thing happens in another big area of their life. Well, you'll start to see is their confidence goes up. And when their confidence goes up, their anxiety in the relationship declines. When someone is feeling very untethered in life, they feel lost in life. They don't know where they don't have meaning. They don't have purpose. They're confused in their career. Maybe they're feeling rejected by family. Maybe they're dealing with certain health crisis, whatever. They're just whether they're in real crisis or something existential. What you'll see is their anxiety in relationship goes way up, way up. Because what happens is life isn't going the way that they want it to go. So they put a lot of stock in the potential of a romantic relationship to be, this is all unconscious, to be the thing that makes them happy again. And so then our expectations go up, and we have all these expectations of this person and of this relationship. And so then we're always afraid of being disappointed. Anxiety goes up. So I think that if we're going to talk about anxiety in relationships, we have to look at it much more holistically. We have to look at the person, see what else is going on in their lives, their other key relationships, how they're relating to themselves. And then we start to crack the code on relationship anxiety. But again, it also has a lot to do with dating apps and just being in swipe left culture and just feeling so disposable. So it's a lot.
It is a lot. And not as simple as like your needs in your relationship are not being met, so you have anxiety. It
Yeah, it's
sounds
just
like
not
way
that.
more complicated than that for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And kind of definitely comes back to this idea of, even if you're in a great relationship, there is this other benefit of checking in with yourself on a very regular basis and
Oh,
making sure
yeah.
you're good with yourself. Because once that starts to deteriorate or fall apart, I could see that turning into a bigger issue between you and your partner or partners. Um,
People who are in very great, strong relationships, um, they either are they're always, they have a level of self-awareness and they're working on themselves. And some people have a more complicated relationship with themselves than others. They just do. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And yes, there are people who have less complicated relationship with themselves, which might mean that they have less trauma, right? Their childhoods were easier. It could also mean a lot of different things. It's not just it's their physical constitution. There's so many variables. I mean, this is the thing I've been obsessed with. And they might not have to be constantly working on themselves to have their relationship be good. And some people have to do a lot more inner work and checking in and have the regular therapist to make sure that their relationship is going well. But strong couples are loving.
yeah.
They're loving towards each other. They're not just giving to get. There's a flow of love, a river of love that's flowing between the two of them pretty consistently, even when they're fighting.
You mentioned attachment style.
Yeah.
And trauma and all these things that are very familiar to me, and I can certainly conceptualize how these things can impact somebody, let alone while they're in a relationship with somebody else. But all these things also make it seem, when I'm hearing about it, I can understand somebody else thinking like, gosh, like relationships sound really hard. How am I supposed to know if it's the right person? Like, we've talked about some things that I could see as being like green flags about somebody. But I mean, this kind of brings to mind this topic that's very difficult for, I think, anybody, is like, how do you build a relationship of trust, right? Like, how can I trust somebody when I maybe in a position that I don't always trust myself, or I've grown up to not be able to trust the people that are supposed to love me or take care of me. So how do you see this come up with couples that you've worked with, or just individuals? Even, it's this idea of trust. We hear about it all the time in a relationship, but it's actually a very complicated thing too. So I'd love to
Yes.
hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So if you're someone who has been betrayed a lot, maybe you were betrayed growing up as a child, maybe you were in a relationship with a few people who cheated on you and there's been some betrayal. I mean, the first thing is, and then consequently you have a bunch of trust issues, right? You really struggle to trust. First is like, if cheating is the thing, then, you have to always, like I said, it all begins with us. And this ties into choosing the right partner. Like, let's say you've been with more than one person who has cheated on you. Usually that person will say, well, can't trust a relationship, can't trust men, can't trust women, right? There'll be a belief that kind of is born out of that experience, instead of, why am I attracted to cheaters? Or if you've been in a relationship where you just weren't treated well, whether it's cheating or something else, it's like, okay, well, what was it in me that was attracted to that? Like, if that's a pattern. So that's really important, because sometimes we get these trust issues. And really what we have to learn is how to trust ourselves. And that's the most important thing. Who you choose to be in a relationship is kind of the whole deal. It's so very important. But I don't want people to think that because it's so important, you have to have like this long laundry list of all the things that you need in a partner. No, just choose the 3 to 4 things that are absolutely essential and be loyal to those 3 to 4 things, no matter how attracted you are to someone. Like those are the things that you must have, or you choose like 2 or 3 things that are absolute deal breakers. So even if you meet someone who's like seems perfect and you're so attracted, if they have just one deal breaker on your list of deal breakers, which is small, then you don't date them. It's really just that simple. And I think that one thing that I've learned with aging and wisdom is that you realize like all the things that you thought that mattered in a partner really don't, and that these other things really matter, like being able to trust. Not everyone agrees with this, but the best couples I know, and they're not perfect, but they're the couples who I know for a fact they will never break up, not because they'll never stay together just because of staying together. They'll never break up because they're really not meant to ever break up. Like they love each other and their relationship will be too good to end. They don't hide anything from one another. And there's a difference between privacy and hiding. Like our thoughts are our thoughts. Like this, a lot of people who are insecure will want to read their partner's mind. They want to know everything that their partner is thinking. They'll feel threatened by the fact that they have a brain that can generate all these thoughts that they're not privy to. Our thoughts are private, right? But I don't believe, and this is not what I'm about to say is going to have an immediate trigger reaction from people. But what I want you to do is I want you to hear what I say, and then I want you to hear what I say after. Okay. I don't believe that anything on your phone or computer should be private. That's the thing that's going to trigger people. Now, let me explain. If you're in a relationship and you feel like you have to look at your partner's phone, something is wrong. It's like what we were talking about earlier about a trigger. Like if you're constantly suffering in your relationship, we don't know what's wrong, but something is definitely wrong. If you feel like you need to look at your partner's phone and go through their personal stuff, something is absolutely, completely wrong. Basic respect would be if I needed to use my partner's phone, I would ask for their permission to look at it. But then my expectation in a relationship would be, yes, of course, honey. And that would be two-way. Like my expectation is you don't just look at my phone, you ask permission, but I'm going to say, yeah, of course, because I don't have anything in my phone that I'm actually trying to hide from you. And I trust that you're not going to just rummage through my phone and read my notes to myself and all of that. So it's so important to build that level of trust where you don't need to look at your partner's phone, but if you have to borrow their phone for something, for whatever reason, it's not a problem. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be a problem. You should be able to leave your phone anywhere. You should be able to know your partner's passcodes in case there's an emergency, with the understanding that they're not going to snoop. And also with the understanding even if you were to snoop, you're not going to find anything incriminating. How do you get to that place with someone? Well, it takes time. It's simple acts of, hey, you forgot your phone at home? Here's my phone. You can call your mom from my phone, no problem. Here's my passcode. Immediately establishing some sort of trust right there. Because if someone does that to you, if someone says, here's my phone, here's my passcode, call your parents, call your mom, call your sister, you left your phone at home. Wouldn't that immediately make you just trust that person? It's like you immediately then think, oh, they've got nothing to hide. And that's really, in the age of social media and technology, this is very important. We didn't have to have these conversations 10, 15, 20 years ago, but we have to have them now. And the reality is that especially with things like Instagram and OnlyFans, and the fact that it's not just men, but it's mostly men are extremely visual, right? What turns a man on much more than a woman would be like the visual. That's why, pornography is mostly consumed by men. Playboy is mostly consumed by men. Like, that's not mostly consumed by women, even though there are some women who do that. And so the biggest threat that I'm seeing right now in especially younger millennial Gen Z couples is, oh my God, I look through, I'm looking at their Instagram and all they do is follow like these really provocative accounts. So one of the things to build trust is to have that conversation in the beginning of the relationship. And what you say is, this is my personal standard. My personal standard is that there is nothing going to be on I might have notes to myself that are kind of private, but if you were to like look at my phone and see who I follow, there's nothing that you're going to see that's going to make you, that's incriminating. I'm not going to be sliding into random people's DMs. You're not going to find me emotionally cheating. Like, you're going to see that the people I follow on Instagram are either friends or like inspirational stuff. Like, this is me and my value system. And if someone is actually following a bunch of provocative accounts, there's no difference between that and going to the strip club. There's no difference between that and consuming pornography. So if it's in your value system not to do that, then you need to have the conversation with someone. This is a value that's very important to me. And that person will be like, if they want to build trust and there's someone that you can trust, they'll be like, okay, this is my Instagram. These are a couple of half naked people that I follow because whatever, I'm mindless. I don't really think about it. Unfollow. I'm unfollowing them. I'm on board with you in this value system. These are the conversations we have to be having. And it's really difficult, but I think it's really important. Anyway, trust is such a complicated, long conversation. I went in a particular direction, so hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah, complicated. Like you said, it's seems like it's very important for couples and even just relationship, anybody that you have a relationship with, to build that trust. I think one of the foundational things I heard you say is like, be a trustworthy person. That's like one of the first things that you can do. And then I see this play out in couples therapy and also individual therapy I do with clients. Often, if you're really untrusting of somebody, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it's because you're doing something that you're also hiding also. So, classic
Totally.
projection.
Yeah.
So if you yourself are a trusty and trustworthy person, maybe you'll be less likely to, be suspicious of somebody else because it's not within your reality right now to be doing stuff that you hide. It also sounds like, depending on what you and your partner or partner's, comfort level is with stuff, you just want to be open, direct enough that it doesn't get to a point where somebody feels like they have to hide something. Like,
Yes.
for some people, it's not a problem that their partners are following whatever or watching whatever,
Yes.
but you wouldn't know that unless you're talking about it. So it's
Yes.
important to get it out in the open, what makes sense for you and your partner, and what is going to help build this trust is just being communicative. I really liked what you said, of there's a difference between privacy and a difference between hiding something. um, if you find yourself doing things, you can ask this self-check question like, is this something I would be honest about, or is this something I feel the need to lie about? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a big indicator of what you're about to do in your decision making. So heard a bit now about how to build trust in a relationship, which is not easy to do if you yourself have past trauma and all these things, but there's some good tips in there. I have another complicated question for you, and I've been
Bring
really
it.
enjoying these answers. You know, what would you say then, in addition to trust, if there are other things, are the most important aspects of finding a lasting and thriving romantic partnership? I think this is like a mystery for so many people. What would you say then? Um,
Yeah.
in,
I first of all, become that right person. So this is not easy, but people are getting obsessed with this idea of like, who's the right person? Are you the right person? Are you what that right person would even want? Because we think, oh, I have a good job, I'm good looking, I take care of my body, I'm a catch. Okay, do you know how to communicate? Are you shut down during conflict? Do you get clingy when during like, who are you? Like, what are the things? I think we have to, it's so tough because I work with a lot of people who struggle with their self-esteem, but we have to all get to a point to say to ourselves, in what ways am I amazing to be in a relationship with? And in what ways am I not amazing? And is there any part of me that is potentially or has been a nightmare to be in a relationship with? This is when we have to get really real with ourselves. The key to choosing well, and you never know, you can choose really well, and then the two of you could screw it up once you found each other. I mean, so it's one thing to find the right partner and to choose someone and to start a relationship with someone. It's another thing to make that last and the work that goes into making it last. You have to know, like I said, you have to understand your own psychology, which means that you have to understand what you've been through, what your weaknesses are, where your strengths are, how you've been hurt in the past. And the more that you understand yourself, what your values are, what is non-negotiably important to you, what is an absolute deal breaker to you, and remember, keeping that list tight. And then you choose based on that. It really should be very simple. It should be like kindness, integrity, and willing to do the work that it takes to be in a relationship, right? So those three main things. And then what you do is you look at your values. Oh, like, I love adventure. Like, it's really important to me to like take risks. Okay, probably better for you to be with someone who will do that with you. Maybe not in quite the same way, but if you're super adventurous, it's going to be kind of difficult to build a relationship with someone who's always playing it safe. That's not necessarily a good match. So it's just learning that level of discernment by really understanding yourself and then honoring yourself, and throw away all the stuff that says the person needs to be in therapy and doing all this work on themselves and this and that. Like, no, you want someone who is not going to run away when there is an important conversation to be had. But then you can't run away. And then you can't be the person who's always wanting to have a serious conversation, because always wanting to have a serious conversation with your partner is going to turn your partner into an avoidant. Because who wants to be in a relationship with someone who always wants to talk about heavy stuff that's going on in the relationship? Not just heavy stuff in the world, but like, you don't want to be talking about the relationship all the time. So we have to know what our patterns are. We have to know the things that we've done that have not served our past relationships, and really work on that and become that right person, and then find someone who's a right match for you. The problem that people do is that they don't take time to figure out what their values are, what's really important to them. And they're choosing people like I used to choose people, which would be like, oh, I'm attracted to you, thus I want to be in a relationship with you. And as important as chemistry and attraction is, that's not enough. Just like love's not enough. Lots of people love each other, but they can't make a relationship work because they're not aligned. They're not compatible. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the things that you have to ask yourself, and just keep it real. You just have to be loyal to your non-negotiables and deal breakers. That is so very important.
Okay, so I have to get rid of my list of like, he's got to be 6 feet tall or over, has to make this much money, has to have these degrees. Like,
get rid of that. But what you could say is, I want someone who's financially stable and can live this particular lifestyle with me. Mm-hmm. You would get rid of like, he's got to be 6 feet. Yeah, throw that away, because as long as you're just choosing people on the exterior and you're just, sorry, it's not going to work. You can continue to do it, but it's going to crash and burn. Guaranteed.
Yeah. And I'm gotta add, if you're going after people just from physical attraction or from even butterflies, sometimes butterflies are not indicative of a good thing. It's
Exactly.
butterflies are also a trigger. It's something to
Yes,
pay attention to. Um, so I have thoroughly enjoyed all of this. I feel like I've learned so many things to take back to my own relationship and my own life personally. So I really appreciate all of that. I'm sure we could keep going, going, stick a relationship coach and a therapist together. I think a lot of interesting conversation certainly does happen. So I'm really
absolutely.
appreciative. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners are eager to continue learning from you. So where can people learn more about you and your offerings?
Yeah. So first thing I would say is just go to my site, which is jillianturecki.com. That's first and foremost. And then my Instagram, which is at Jillian Turecki. And then my podcast, which is Jillian on Love. So though I am also on TikTok, but I would say like for free content, go to Jillian on Love, look up Jillian on Love podcast, look up my Instagram, Jillian Turecki, and then I have some really cool offerings on my site.
Thank you so much. We'll definitely link all of that. Thank you again for your time, for your energy, your wisdom, and expertise.
Thank
And I
you.
hope everybody out there continues working on that most important relationship.